Hello! Welcome to the live stream. Today's donut is really something, so I have to show you this. It is, like, I'm just jumping into the donut situation. So this is a blueberry pound cake donut, and it has little stars all over it, and it has a pipette of blueberry juice that I didn't know how I was supposed to eat this, but I watched videos of it online. So, I don't know, I'm pretty excited about that. Oh yeah, I also forgot to tweet out that we're doing a live stream right now. Oh well. My phone's in the other room, so I can't tweet. Anyway, it's American Independence Day, which means that probably no one will show up to this live stream today, but it also means that the theme for today is talking about America versus the world, which is a live stream topic we did, or a podcast topic we did back in 2019 about America's finance system and how it varies from the rest of the world. And obviously a few things have changed in the world since 2019. I don't know about you, but a lot of things have changed. And so I thought it would be interesting to do another re-update, especially because the live stream occurs on 4th of July. How are folks? Is anyone here, or am I just by myself? I do wonder, because it is 4th of July, and I feel like people might be going places and doing things. So if I'm just sitting in the house by myself, talking about the American finance system and eating a donut, I mean, that's a choice that I guess I'm making in my life. Is anyone here? It's a very quiet chat. Yeah, I guess it's hard to do a live stream with absolutely no audience whatsoever. I have to pretend that I am doing live radio, I guess. So, the general topics I want to talk about are how the United States differs in the finance system from the rest of the world, because it is American Independence Day, which we just refer to as 4th of July because America. And obviously, American Independence Day does not actually mean independence for all Americans, as a country that was founded with not equal participation for people based on their enslaved status or not. And so, you know, Independence Day is a bit of a strong word, but I think reflecting on America and how it differs from other rich countries is a useful exercise when really thinking about America as the richest country in the world and the exporter of democracy, so to speak, place in the world, and also the fact that the American finance industry is so dominant on the world stage. And so that would be interesting to kind of look at how things are different here. And quite a lot of the things I asked on the forums or to listeners about what surprises people not from the US about the United States' financial systems, labor laws, things that we do differently that other countries don't do. And I think one of the most apparent differences to a lot of people in other countries is that for a country that is so rich and so technologically advanced, a lot of the ways in which we interact with actual finances seem very antiquated. Like, for example, the average American still writes like 40 paper checks a year. A lot of other rich countries have completely done away with paper checks, and a lot of the global south never had paper checks in the first place as a method of giving money between people. But a lot of Americans still pay their rent using paper checks. And, versus like Denmark, for example, banned paper checks in 1992. Like, they cannot be issued whatsoever there. And so when we talked about this in 2019, there were a lot of people very surprised about why we don't have easy payment, automatic electronic payment between people, and why paper checks were still so common for paying your rent. And the main reason still kind of persists here in the United States that persisted in 2019, but some things have changed. So for one, ACH, which is automatic clearinghouse transactions, which is our banking system in the United States, it's electronic transfer system, which is essentially electronic checks. That's like some people even refer to them as e-checks, are has been sped up slightly. So a lot of them will now have next business day processing. It used to be that with paper checks, you would have to wait for them to clear. That's still very much true for a lot of people, although a lot of banks will kind of float it if you have kind of good credit with the institution, where if you electronically deposit a check, they will not wait to find out if the other person has the money in their bank account before they will credit it to you. The reason that we have paper checks is essentially it is very challenging to make all banks in the United States agree on one thing because we have so many banking institutions. So compare the United States to Canada. Canada has 88 banks. The United States has over 10,000 depository institutions. And that means that banks are allowed to have a lot more innovation. They're allowed to do things on an individual basis in the United States. While there is regulation for all depository institutions in the United States, and there's even more regulation after the Dodd-Frank Act, which passed after the financial crisis, checks, you cannot force all of the banks to just not issue checks. They can't say there are no more checks allowed. And so to have technological innovation with such a high number of banks in the United States, it becomes a lot harder to make a change over. Additionally, the automatic clearinghouse system essentially uses single just lists of routing numbers and bank account numbers because it is the closest thing that it is just a balance sheet every night that banks upload to all of the other banks in the United States and through the automatic clearinghouse system, and essentially say, this is all the checks we got, please check it against your balance sheet, look back. And that system is just built in order to have so many different depository institutions interact with it. If you are in a country that only has 5 main banks that have consumer banking, it is a lot easier to make a change between all of those. Nathan says, Wolf reminds me I'm out of paper checks and I need to pay a contractor soon with one. Why are they so expensive? Here's a fun fact. You can print your own checks. You might not know that. If you have access to a printer, you can print your own checks. You can get check paper if you want. Technically, a check only has to have, I think, 7 elements to be legal tender. So you just need to get your routing number, your account number printed on the bottom. It's best to use the little special numerals that the banks can automatically read. And it has to have your payment information, the amount written out. Believe it or not, the number that you write in the box, the actual number, that's not legally required, nor is it the thing that the bank looks for. It's actually the hand long written out amount that is the legal tender part of it, and the date, I believe, and then signature. And those, so you could print your own checks. They will accept almost all banks will accept a printed check. That's how businesses how they make checks. 50% of US businesses still do the majority of their business payments via check. So it really is something that we are very slow to adapt to in the United States. In the past couple years, we've had a lot more bank industry person-to-person transfers be initiated. Most of them are piggybacked off the ACH system, though. But the problem with using the ACH system for hey, I want to pay my friend $5 or whatever, in other countries you can just text a friend if they have a bank system in that country, and you can just text them money. in other rich countries, I should say. In the United States, it doesn't work that way because essentially you need that like pre-authorization of ACH, and it's piggybacking on the ACH. But Zelle is one of the big ones that was started by a lot of the large banks in the United States. Here's the thing: when a large bank in another country decides to do something, that means the majority of banking consumers have access to it. So the top 3 banks in Canada have 85% of the consumer market share. In the United States, they have 35% of the market share. That really shows you the difference in the scale as far as how different it is in the United States in order to make changes in banking technology. I used a feature that my credit union advertised as pay anyone anywhere from your account feature. I found out they actually just print a paper check and mail it to the recipient. I've actually had that on my bank account since the 90s. And I think it's because, so I have USAA, which is a military co-op bank, and they've never had physical locations. And because of that, I've always been able to have them like print and mail checks. The downside, though, with checks, as anybody can attest to, is that the waiting time is so long for checks compared to other forms of payment. And that is one of the huge downsides with like the pay anyone from your check. Nathan says, I found out because the check was lost in the mail. That's so frustrating. Yeah, it's gone now, but Simple Bank, which was like the tech bank, I had bosses that were looking for a new house and their only personal bank was Simple. And they were in a competitive rental market trying to find a landlord to rent to them. And Simple did not allow you they didn't give you paper checks. You could only have them like send a check from their accounts. And it turns out that that's like a huge problem. You can't go like shopping for apartments and not be able to write a check on site if you're in a competitive market in the United States. SK says, only time I've seen paper checks in Germany in the past 2 decades is companies being shitty with cashback schemes trying to make you not cash it in. Yeah, I feel like that is it's so different. I was floored at how different checks are because I had just become so normalized to them here in the United States. Nikki says, is it easier to get a bank charter in the U.S. than other countries? That really depends on the country. Not necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's true. We actually have a very highly regulated banking market compared to a lot of other countries. It's just I would say it's actually harder in a lot of ways because in the United States, you have a much higher reserve requirement. So banks in like Canada and the UK, for example, can have much lower, they can leverage more. Essentially, they have lower depository requirements. But in the United States, we actually have very high depository requirements. So no, I wouldn't say that. That we just have a lot of banks because we innovated. That has been true for an extremely long time. In 1920, the United States had 30,000 banking institutions, which was more than every other country in the world combined. The philosophy of how we run our banking system is about diversity, hyper-localized banking systems, which we, of course, the savings and loan crisis and the Great Depression have taught us a little bit about the downsides of that system. And we've tried to use the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, to kind of make that up. Aaron says, I haven't bought a check in at least a decade. I bought a 500-sheet package of check paper and have been slowly going through printing my own checks. I get Aaron to print my checks still. So part of my problem was that I moved so often that, at least I used to move so often, that I was just like frustrated because I'd buy a box of checks and then they immediately would be irrelevant again. Abel Jack says, hey, USAA has 2 locations, Plano, Texas, and Norfolk, Virginia. Slander. I guess I should say I've never been located in even the same time zone as a USAA banking location. I also think when I first joined, there was no walk-up service at either of those locations. But they still bank mainly as an online bank even since the 90s. They actually, USAA as a military bank invented the technology behind mobile check deposit, which maybe sounds irrelevant to people in other countries that don't get a bunch of checks. But here, mobile check deposit is pretty great. That's the big, like, what SK was saying about checks and, like, how challenging it can be to actually deposit them in other countries. Like, I have a friend who's an American expat living in Germany, has been there for a long time, and she has had to just beg her relatives to not give her checks. Like, please don't give me a birthday check. Don't send me a check to, like, reimburse me for something. It is so challenging for me to deposit a check, and it ends up costing so much in Germany. SK, apparently, Germany has 1,700 registered banks, halved in the past 20 years, although I assume lots of them are in groups sharing infrastructure. That's also true with the United States, like 10,000 of those are in groups sharing infrastructure. But those 10,000 are still, like, depository institutions. So that isn't, like, every bank branch for Bank of America or whatever. So checks, I think, are one of the really big and compelling things. Since the 2019 episode, though, there has been a bunch of advances in the actual physical banking infrastructure of the United States. For example, we finally got contactless and chip and signature in the United States. Some credit card companies even did chip and PIN, although I will say that chip and PIN is still extremely rare. That being said, I haven't had to sign anywhere in the past year and a half for a single credit card transaction, and I've pretty much exclusively been able to do contactless in the United States. So it took a really long time for us to move over our EVN infrastructure. Contactless has existed in other countries for quite a long time, in other rich countries, and it just took a lot longer. A lot of people had questions about why the United States did not move over to chip and PIN and move to chip and signature. So in the United States, you know, we've used swipe, magnetic strips, and then signature for a really long time for credit cards, debit cards, any kind of card transactions in the United States. And it's a pretty insecure technology compared to chip and PIN theoretically. But the big reason that we moved just to chip and signature versus chip and pen was that we had already built in a lot of the infrastructure in place for kind of verifying signatures. Fraud protection went way beyond actually relying on the physical signatures. The signatures was just like another piece of information, but fraud detection has more to do with machine learning about where people spend and where they're located and stuff like that. The big reason is that a lot of credit card issuers just do not want to have to deal with issuing PINs to everyone. So, the few cards that I had that I can use abroad, which I am so excited have PIN now, because it used to be that when I used my American cards abroad, people would like just come out and they'd be like, and they'd like have to get out the signature pad for me. They'd be like, an American with their American card, because signatures are so rare in the rest of the world for credit cards. The main reason is that credit card issuers did not have the infrastructure in place to issue everyone PINs, and actually doing the PIN issuance costs more money. Like, it costs more money per EVN transaction for the issuer than signature. Actually, like, detecting fraud and dealing with the fraud that can occur with the lack of a PIN costs a lot less than dealing with people losing their PINs, sending out physical PIN things in the mail to everyone, having a phone verification system for PINs. And the US leans a lot more heavily on credit transactions versus debit transactions compared to the rest of the world, partially because credit is more freely flowing. Majority of the United States adults do have access to a credit card. And whereas in a lot of other countries, it is actually extremely rare to have credit cards. You're more likely to have a debit card that has an overdraft protection than to necessarily have a ton of different credit cards, partially because we have so many credit issuers in the United States compared to a lot of other countries. So a lot of those credit card companies didn't actually have infrastructure up for PIN, and kind of the choice was made that it would be easier to just move to chip and signature for a lot of those issuers. So I do have a couple that allowed me to set up a PIN, but SK says there was a meme going around last week. German restaurants are refusing to take card payments again. Pandemic is ending. Nature is healing. That's totally true. Like, I had a thought where I was like, I wonder when I start traveling in Europe again, if all of those places that used to be cash only that moved to being card only during the pandemic are going to like switch back. I guess they did switch back. That is very interesting to see. So yeah, Nathan, you can print your own checks. I recommend it. It's very easy. Although I will say I get it mostly done for me. Okay, do we want to talk about other things that are different in the United States with money that isn't just about the banking institutions? I feel like that's easier than getting into, than talking about the real structural inequality and poor labor laws in the United States compared to other OECD rich countries. But at some point, I think we have to talk about that. Nikki said, Simple eventually got checks, but since they're gone, I'm now using One Finance. But they don't have checks. I've gotten used to having an extra bank account just so I can write checks when needed. That's kind of frustrating. I mean, if One is working for you, that's great. I just signed up for, so we're doing Summer of Funds over on Oh My Dollar, and one of the things that we're doing is the budgeting app games, budgeting app Olympics, but don't sue me, IOC. The part of that is that people are trying out a bunch of different budgeting apps, online banks, kind of methodology, and we're going to compile them into a big write-up of kind of what the different ratings are, and then we're going to also award them gold, silver, and bronze medals because it's part of Summer of Funds and the budgeting app games. But because of that, I signed up for Chime Bank, which is kind of, I think, meant to be another neobank that is kind of replacing Simple. And I was really surprised to find that I can't get checks issued from it. But the really frustrating thing for me was that I tried to do a deposit with their mobile deposit from my own business account, which I've had for years. It's through a credit union. It's like a legit business account. I've never had trouble with that check being accepted by anyone else. And this one was like, you can't deposit this check. We don't understand it. So I was a little concerned about that. But yeah, I guess I can't get checks through that. I'm just trying it out. I'm not looking to switch banks. I actually really like USAA, even though I don't love all of the politicians they contribute to. But I like to try out different types of banks just to kind of see what's out there. And Chime has a credit builder card, and usually credit builder cards are actually hard to find with banks that exist across the whole US, and banks that have good apps. They tend to be dominated in like local credit unions and stuff. And I want to try it out because I do work with a lot of young people that need credit builder cards, and I thought it would be kind of interesting. SK says, you touched on it, but the entire building credit thing is something that seems US specific. So, yeah, I mean, most rich countries, every OECD system has a credit system, which is whether or not you are creditworthy in order to lend money to. But the specificity of the United States' credit system, which is actually 3 different credit systems that are regulated by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, actually is something in the US that came out of the civil rights movement in the United States. So the reason that we have the type of credit system and credit reporting system that we have in the United States and that it is regulated by the federal government is because it specifically excludes what you can use in order to determine if someone is creditworthy. So you can't include their gender, their religion, their race, their family status, their marital status. All of these things cannot be reflected in credit reports in the United States. And that came out of the Civil Rights Movement and the Fair Credit Reporting Act that passed in the 1970s in the US. And the big reason that we have this, and it varies so much from other countries, was one, we have a lot more access to the credit in the United States than a lot of other countries do. We have more lenders. So in a lot of other countries, if you wanted to get a mortgage, there might be a very limited number of institutions from which you can get a mortgage. But because of the diversity of the United States' lending institutions, one thing that we ran into was that the methods that they used for determining whether or not you were creditworthy would be that they would contract with private investigators, kind of third-party agencies that would then determine whether or not you were a good credit risk, and there was no restrictions on what that file could be. So it could be whether or not you paid your tab down the bar down the road, whether or not you cheated on your wife, what religion you belong to, do you actually attend Sunday service? And because of that, we had a lot of structural inequality in home ownership and access to credit and lending and ability to start businesses. And one of the things that was pushed for in the civil rights movement in the United States was essentially an standardized method on which you could have your credit reported. And what we got out of that was the credit system that we have now, which is 3 main credit agencies. There's actually technically a bit more, but there's 3 only really. And there's, you have rights about what can be on your credit report in the United States and whether or not you can dispute them. The big downside is that, obviously the system was meant to put a number on whether or not you were creditworthy, but lenders can use other information to decide if you're a good risk to lend to. You can have a perfect credit score, but maybe not otherwise be a good risk to lend to. And additionally, private algorithms, which are the 3, credit reporting agencies, are all private companies. They're regulated by federal law, but they're private companies, and they have private algorithms that determine your score here in the United States. And the big downside of this is that algorithms are not unbiased. Algorithms contain a ton of systemic bias. And so we've continued to have a lot of the inequalities in lending, in home ownership, in generational wealth be perpetuated by the existence of the credit system. It is the opposite of how a lot of other countries do it. So a lot of other countries, your credit score will start perfect. Like, essentially, you are assumed to have good credit. And then if you are someone who doesn't pay their bills, if you are, in some way doing something that makes you more risky to lenders, your credit score will go down. In the United States, it is the opposite. Essentially, we assume we have no information about you, and you need to start building up a score. There are ways to get around this. I've done tons of live streams on the credit report in the United States and how to kind of hack their credit score. But we kind of go the opposite direction. And I think some of that has to do with this American ideology of the American dream and being able to build something from nothing, and the idea that we are a society without classes, which is 100% not true. It's just that class is reflected in a different way in the United States than, it necessarily is in other countries that might have a more established class system. But yeah, the idea that you can start from nothing and build to something, which is not realistically true. There's plenty of ways in which people can inherit great credit scores from their parents, passed through generational wealth in the US. So, but yeah, we also have a lot more free lending. It is a lot easier for individuals to get access to credit, to take out debt in the United States than it is in most other rich countries. Should we talk about taxes, or should I just eat a donut? Because I could just eat a donut instead of talking about how US taxes are different. I mean, look at this donut. It's got these stars on it. So yeah, it is different. credit in the US. Part of the freely flowing credit in the US is that we have a much lower savings rate. Taxes, no donut. See, Applejack is always trying to do that, and I feel like everyone else is always pro donut, trying to ruin my fun. Okay, let's talk about taxes in the United States. So, the United States tax system is extremely complicated on an individual basis compared to every other OECD country. And in the United States, we have the highest tax revenue of any country. That largely has to do with how big our economy is. But particularly notable is that the largest chunk of our total taxes compared to every other country in the world comes from individual taxes. So even when you think about high tax countries, you say, the United Kingdom, France, places that have high amounts of social insurance built into their tax system, or high tax rates for the rich classes, the United States actually still, of their tax revenue, a larger portion of it comes from individuals. Part of what has happened in the United States is that we use the tax system as our method of encouraging certain kinds of social behavior. So we try to use taxes as a way of influencing certain behaviors, rewarding certain behaviors, and that has made our system extremely complicated. It also has made our system it has made it politically popular in the United States to suggest things that would actually be worse for low and middle class people that make taxes less complicated, like, for example, a flat tax, like getting rid of certain kinds of tax benefits that, the often bandied about in the United States. What if you could file your taxes on something as big as a postcard? The idea that we have our taxes taken out of our paycheck, every week, every month, however often you get paid, if you're a regular worker in the US, and then you still have to file, and filing is still complicated and hard in the United States, is pretty different than most other countries. How complicated taxes are in the United States is a function of two main things. One, trying to influence behavior, and two, the fact that we are using taxes as our way of getting people to claim social insurance programs. So in other countries, things like the, child payments that you might get, like, in Canada, you get a monthly child payment, which just started this month in the United States for a temporary period of time, thanks to COVID and the COVID relief bill. But you've been getting those in Canada for I don't even know how long, I think 40 plus years, where, low and middle income people get paid monthly for having children. In the United States, the way that we administer social benefits is entirely through the tax system, and we force people to claim their own benefits through the tax system. So things like the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, all of that happens, all of that social insurance stuff happens through the US, and that is a very uniquely United States problem. And the other thing is that the United States uses this individual income tax, which has to be claimed via these returns, as in substitution for the thing that we don't have that 190 other countries do have, which is a value-added tax. VAT, or a value-added tax, is a consumption tax on goods that individuals pay, and that we don't have in the United States. 190 other countries do have that. And the reason we don't have it in the United States is that sales tax or consumption tax here is usually done by cities or states, and income tax is mainly the purview of the federal government here. So essentially the way we've chosen to administer it and the way that we've chosen to get our tax revenue largely influences the way that we, how complicated it is. The other part of it is, of course, that tax prep private corporations lobby Congress to make it complicated and make it so that you can't automatically file in the United States. But if people were not filing because we have wrapped so much of our social insurance here in the United States into our tax system, it means that a lot of low and middle income people, if we essentially eliminated that step, would not actually be getting the money that is owed to them through the social insurance programs. So, a large overhaul would need to be done in order to kind of make it work. That's some things about taxes. Anybody have tax questions about what is different here in the United States compared to other countries? Our actual tax rates are not drastically different than a lot of other rich countries. We essentially tax lower and middle income people similarly to a lot of other countries. The downside is that there is a lot less social insurance programs necessarily that are just flat money assistance to low income people. So they come back through the earned income tax credit, tax refunds, all of those sorts of things. Don't even get me started on mortgage interest deduction, but it kind of changed. Kind of. So, yeah, it's definitely different here than it is in other countries. Do I think it'll change anytime soon? No. I think that actually, especially under our current administration, I think it's likely that U.S. taxes get more and more complicated on an individual basis because we're trying to administer more and more social insurance programs through them. Notably, the fact that a ton of people have not been able to file or have not received their refunds for 2020 because all of the temporary COVID relief that we passed, so much of that was done through the tax system. So we are trying to fix our problems with the United States with healthcare and access to healthcare for low and middle income people. We are trying to fix access to the lack of access to sick pay, paid sick days in the United States through the unemployment system in the United States. And then we are reconciling that unemployment via the tax system in the United States. And we are also trying to fix the child tax credit through something that just rolled out this month and is only temporary through the tax system. So I don't think it's going to get any less complicated in the United States anytime soon. I don't think there's any hope of that. There are a ton of people that have still not gotten their refunds for 2020. And there are a lot of people who haven't been able to file yet. And that is how overwhelmed the IRS is, because we essentially administer all of our programs through the tax system here in the United States for individuals. So yes, also, in addition to the fact that we have the highest tax revenue, a smaller percentage of our taxes actually goes to social insurance in the United States. So, as much as we feel like Social Security taxes take out a huge chunk, or that a huge portion of our taxes goes to, SNAP, supplemental nutrition, or food stamps as it's known, or WIC, or any of these other programs, it's actually true in the United States that quite a smaller percentage of our overall tax revenue goes to those things. And that is one reason that the Social Security Trust Fund is maybe not doing as well as it should. But also the fact that we don't pay for healthcare really quite through our tax system in totally the same way. All right, one last depressing thing before I dive into the donut in the United States. So, parental leave in the United States. The U.S. is the only country in the world that does not have mandated maternity leave for all workers. And we are the only OECD country that does not have paid maternity leave mandated for workers. And we are one of the only OECD countries that does not have a paternity leave mandated by the federal government. So what we do have in the United States is the Families with a Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, which says that you get 12 weeks of unpaid parental leave following the birth of a child or the adoption of a child or other kinds of family, personal health care things that you would need. However, FMLA is, once again, it's unpaid. Two, it's not administered by the government. It's just a rule. And it only applies to workers that work more than 15 hours a week, have worked at their employer for over a year, and that their job site has more than 50 employees. Because of this, only 44% of United States workers are actually covered by the FMLA. And once again, that just gets you access to guaranteeing that you can have your job and continue to get health insurance through your employer for 12 weeks unpaid. So, so essentially in the United States, we don't have a solution. For their states have been trying to do it at the state level, but a lot of workers aren't covered by it, and I don't know, it's outrageous. That's it. This is just part of the thing that, like, this is just a thing the United States doesn't seem to understand. Does part of the IRS slowdown have to do with issuing refunds in the form of checks? I'm sure that isn't speeding things up, but that's not actually why the IRS is so far behind. The IRS is incredibly far behind because they were already in the midst of tax season. People had already filed returns, and then Congress passed a completely new tax bill without actually getting more employees for the IRS, which has been slowly drained of employees over the past several years under the previous administration. And there just literally was not enough people to do it. So they had to issue stimulus payments. They had to figure out how to get stimulus payments to people while also figuring out how all these new tax laws that had been passed as part of the stimulus, as part of the third stimulus bill under the Biden administration applied while in the midst of tax season. I know plenty of tax preparers who had finished clients' returns and then had to completely redo them because everything changed. So the IRS slowdown is quite simply that they were given too much work and too few people and too few directions. So I don't think checks are really the problem. The IRS is decently okay at issuing checks. What they are bad at figuring out is figuring out how to administer a bunch of new changes and figure out how to integrate it into our extremely complicated individual tax code in the United States. Literally, a ton of the tax policy that was written, they didn't even have it worked out how they were going to do it, which is why the child monthly payments that so essentially this month they've now started where if you qualify for the child tax credit, you can get your child payment each month for the rest of this year versus waiting till tax time to get it. This is totally new for the U.S. It's also only for this year. It's not like a long-term policy. But the reason it didn't start until July was because they just had no idea how the administration of it was going to work. So yeah, they're just totally overwhelmed. All right, let's eat a donut. Look at this shiny pretty thing. Should I squeeze this pipette on camera? Like on this close camera? So I read on the internet what I'm supposed to do while I watched a video. I'm supposed to squeeze this. It's a blueberry pound cake. I'm supposed to squeeze this pipette onto it. Should I save this little bit? It's very 4th of July themed. Oh my gosh, it smells like real blueberries. It's all made from real blueberries. Oh, it smells so strong of blueberries. Off-topic callback to previous stream. Today, the Ever Given was finally allowed to leave. I didn't realize it had still been there. Is it fine? Like, it just got stuck, but it's like such a big ship, it's fine, right? I want to know how much insurance had to pay out for that. Also, did someone lose their job? This is delicious. It smells... I wish you could have smell-o-vision because it smells exactly like real blueberries. It's not... There's nothing, like, fake about it. It's very fluffy insides. The stars don't seem to taste like anything. They just are sprinkles. Do you know anything else about the Ever Given being allowed to leave, SK? Nikki, the donut came from where they almost always come from. Dough. It is a vegan donut shop close to my house. NNLS says, as an Aussie, I don't think I have seen used a check since I was a kid, even though then I think I wanted one so I could take it to the bank, so my granddad gave me one for my birthday instead of cash. Ablejack says, Egypt is still negotiating the fines. I'm going to do an update on that. I'll do an update live stream on the fines for that. That sounds fun. I enjoyed doing the Ever Given stream just because it was so out of my normal wheelhouse, so it was fun to do all the research on it. What do you think was on that boat that people are waiting on? Like, I want someone to get a hold of, like, the manifest for that ship and just tell us what all of the things that got stuck in there. It's like I bet it's like a bunch of Peloton bikes. Is there a bunch of, like, flour in there? This is absolutely delicious. I think more donuts should come with a pipette of blueberry syrup. It's like the advantages of all the fresh kind of syrup, except that it wasn't soggy even though it was sitting there. That was very 4th of July-ish, I would say. I'm sure I'm blue now. Purple from all of that blueberry. Do we want to talk about prison or student loans? Which is less depressing? Both are pretty depressing, but I think prison might be more depressing. Or do we want to just continue to talk about the Ever Given, which I don't really know anything about, but I'll just sit here and repeat whatever Ablejack says. So do we think that someone lost their job? How many people do we think lost their job due to the Ever Given? So, like, there was a lot of loss of money, but there was no loss of life. Just seeing reports that apparently companies that had stuff on the ship were required to pay into a fund to partially pay for the fines. That seems not fair. It seems like if you're a company using them to ship stuff, then you're paying for the service of them knowing how to run a ship, and you shouldn't pay for their mistakes. Maybe that's too optimistic of me, but Ablejack says, I know nothing, but probably not the pilot. Pilots are fuckers. I feel like that might be your professional opinion. SK says, sea shipping is weird like that. I I do want to do another live stream on this just because I know so little about it, so it'd be kind of fun to do research and talk to someone in global sea shipping. I'll find out who I can get as a source. I spent 10 days living at a merchant marine academy, and I drank with quite a lot of sailors at the merchant marine academy. I was not there to learn how to be a merchant marine. I was there for data boot camp for politics. That being said, I think I still have some of those people's information, and I can probably get some quotes from some merchant marines. Like, you can get insurance for this. Well, I know that they have to have insurance, because they also have to have, like, piracy insurance and stuff like that. But I'm very... I have so many questions. Also, what nationality were all of the crew and stuff like that? But it's not the default. The idea that everyone is together insures the ship in case something happens, and then you can decide if you risk it or not. But I know that they have piracy insurance, though. It's, like, pretty much required for all freight ships, as far as I understand. Like, it's impossible to do business without piracy insurance, which is part of the reason that pirates are so keen to get freight ships, because essentially they don't have to be particularly brutal. They just have to take the ship and then wait for the insurance to pay out. NNLS says, a few years ago when I was in the US, I was out drinking and I tried to tap, and then I just walked away with my drinks, and I think the bartender thought I was trying to get away with not paying. I was chatting with one of the rides I was leading recently. I was talking with one of the bartenders that, like, things have pretty much reopened in my state this week and have been, like, slowly reopening for a while. And the kid who was a bartender was like, yeah, so here's the thing. Everyone is, like, right now, like, their first time at a bar where they, like, don't remember how things work or how friendly with the bartender they need to be. And I feel like the, like, tapping and everything, it's all just part of it, because the contactless payments really only came to the US shortly before everything shut down. So I feel like Americans are in the same situation right now. Today I tried to tap at Goodwill, which is like our, it's like a resale shop here in Portland, in the United States. But I was trying to tap with my phone to pay, and they were like, oh yeah, that just doesn't work. And I had that moment of like, oh, this is how it used to be, that like no one's worked, but it's only like the nonprofit, charity shops that they don't work anymore, because I'd gotten so used to them working almost everywhere. So, I don't know if I want to talk about prisons. It's depressing, but it is an important thing to talk about on Independence Day, because the United States has the largest prison population in the world, with over 2 million people that are incarcerated. And in prison in the United States, it is the exception to people being able to be enslaved. You can essentially still be a slave for the state as long as it is penal payment. And because of that, we have the largest prison population in the world, and we have longer sentences. So in the United States, we have a lot of mandatory minimum sentencing. So a first-time drug offense in the United States, a typical sentence is 8 to 10 years in our prison system. How that is actually administered, it very much depends on the state, what that looks like, how much time you actually end up doing versus how much time you do on paper in the United States. But we also have extremely high recidivism, thanks to all of the barriers that we have put in place, including the fact that suffrage is not universal for people that have been imprisoned in the United States, despite the fact that we like to believe that we have voting rights for all adults. That is not true. And in addition to having the largest prison population, the severity of those punishments because of mandatory minimum sentencing far outstrips most of the world. And we also tend to have the most human rights violations in our prisons of all OECD countries, which is essentially a collection of rich countries. So, last numbers I find is that the ship owners offered to pay $100 million, and the channel authorities have been down to $550 million. So somewhere in between. Wow. Okay, I'll do a full ship insurance. I'll do my best to understand how this works and try to do a proper live stream on this because it's very fascinating. I would like to know in logistics of sea shipping how different the insurance schemes go compared to freight in other, because there's always a last mile solution, right? So what does the insurance look like as soon as it hits the shore? How does it vary once you put it onto semis and trucks and all of those sorts of things? Yeah, I'm very fascinated. Okay, prisons. That's it. Savings rates. We don't save that much, but we saved a lot during COVID, so we'll see. United States, a colony that took over stolen land and has a lot of banks. That's the conclusion. We have all the money and 20% of the prisoners. Anyone have any questions about the US? A very hot topic last time that I did one of these was about tipping in the US. And kind of what I learned is that tipping is very complicated, but the existence of tipped minimum wage in the United States appears to be unique to the United States. I was not able to find another country that has a tipped exclusive minimum wage. Tipping practices really vary by countries and like whether or not it's the norm and what percentage and who you tip and don't tip. But the existence of tipped minimum wage seems to be a uniquely American thing. And it is also not true in every single state in the United States because our minimum wages and the exceptions to those minimum wages vary by state and even local jurisdiction in the United States. Because the United States is really 52 countries standing in a trench coat pretending to be one country. I guess DC too, if we consider DC one of to be as actively different as like Puerto Rico and Guam. So 53. It's really 53 countries standing in a trench coat, pretending to be a country. And using the tax code, the federal tax code, to make up any differences between them. Well, we're at an hour. This has been a weird live stream. But the donut was great. And I am very excited to do another live stream on Ever Given in the future. So I will learn everything I can about sea shipping insurance and what that situation is like and do an update because I was pretty excited by that. I don't want to talk about student loans, so we're just not going to talk about them. But they're very different in every other country. Or health insurance, because that's just like the theme of this whole thing. Well, have a lovely rest of your Sunday or your Monday. And if you're in Europe, please go to sleep. You can go to sleep just like this cat. It's demonstrating here. She's so tired. She's so tired. She's the tiredest cat. Oh, I want to pet her. Make her go to sleep. Okay. Well, I'm going to watch the cat. And we're going to close out with this stream. So please take care of yourself this week. And I will see you same time, same place next week. And I believe we are going to be talking about the child tax credit, but I'm not totally sure, so I will let you know. And please, if you haven't already, check into Summer of Funds on the forums and to the budgeting app Olympics, and we have more Summer of Fun stuff coming up soon. So come join us on the forums. All right. Stay safe, stay hydrated, pet a cat if you have one available, and I'll see you next week. Bye.